Good morning. My name is Adam Israel, and I am your instructor for this summer's Philosophy 105 class entitled Rule and Revolt. Now, as it's a introduction to political philosophy, you might begin by wondering, what are these things? Philosophy, politics. When we think about politics, oftentimes the first sorts of things that come to our mind are things like power or manipulation, who controls the government, a way of keeping the people in line. I'd like you to take a second and think about, how do you understand politics? Is it the thing that you're not allowed to talk about at the family table? Uh, is it something you're volunteering for? Perhaps this summer you're involved in a non for profit organization, or you're involved in the presidential election, which I'm certain many of you have been following. Um, yeah, what is politics? This is a good starting question. Often we assume we understand the things that we talk about, we know what they are. Uh, a first clue into what philosophy is, then, has to do with this sort of question about what are the things that we are talking about? What actually do they refer to? We often say things like, oh, family, that comes first, or religion, that comes first. And if someone were to ask, what are these things? We'd have an answer pretty quickly. My family will, my parents, my brother, my uncles. Religion, well, it's a tradition I share with my family, or it's a tradition I have with myself. It's my relationship to ethics, something like that. Uh, but as you keep asking questions, you might find they get harder. You'd know this if you've ever played with a 4-year-old child who has just discovered the power of the word why. There's a great Louis C.K. video on this that I'll actually throw up on Blackboard for you, that captures some of that energy of philosophy. The word politics itself, in any case, comes from the Greek, as do a bunch of our words that we use in philosophy. Um, its etymology starts with this word polis. The polis was the Greek city-state, and so it was roughly the size of a small city. Aristotle's word is synoptos. In other words, you should be able to see it in one glance, the whole city. So maybe we're thinking the size of Huntington or something like that. And these city-states in ancient Greece were the size of a city, but they had the autonomy that we today associate with a nation state. They made their own laws, conducted their own foreign policy. And so the polis was the political society. And Aristotle, who created this word, ta politica, uh, generated this idea of a study or a science of the collective living together. And so one of the ways we could think about politics is human public life. And why do I say human? Since for Aristotle, the human is a political animal, which is to say, by our very nature, we live together and we live in societies. And so politics is designed to ask the question, what does that mean to live together collectively, and how should we do it? So, some thoughts about politics. As for philosophy, philosophy also comes from the Greek, and it originally meant philosophia, or the love of wisdom. And interestingly, not merely wisdom, although that might be one of the first thoughts that pops into your head if you were to try to define philosophy, some kind of wisdom, some kind of way of thinking. Originally, it meant a love of wisdom, and certainly not a direct possession of it. Uh, what does that mean? Well, in one sense, it means to take a relationship to knowledge of questioning, and so not trying to decide what necessarily is the right answer. What do we know? What is the state? What is a person? But how would we know something like that? And what would count as a good answer? And so, an old teacher of mine used to talk about philosophical questions are questions squared, or questions about questions. Um, Thinking about thinking. What does it mean? All of us have some idea of right and wrong, but what does that look? What is an idea of right and wrong? What makes an idea of right right? What makes an idea of wrong wrong? And what should count as a good answer? This would be a characteristically philosophical type of question. How we know what we claim to know, not an opinion of what is right, but what makes a right opinion right. In the United States, particularly, we have a tendency to think about the idea of opinion. We all have a right to our opinion. Well, that's just your opinion. I have an opinion, you have an opinion. Um, Philosophy gets off the ground by trying to ask a follow-up question. Okay, you all have your opinion. But what is the ground of your opinion? Why do you think that? All right, you think we should recycle. All right, well, very good. Why? What is the justification for that? Well, all right, preserving the environment. We've got to save the environment. Why is that important? What is it that makes saving the environment itself important? Is it human survival? Is that the point of politics? Is that somewhere where we can connect? And interestingly, what starts to play out is if you confront someone who has the opposing view, say we should not recycle, if you merely confront them head to head, so I say we should recycle, the other person says we should not recycle, um, you don't really get very far. You might be able to sort of compel them. Maybe you can scare them into agreeing with you. Maybe you can offer them something, bribe them to agree with you. But it's really hard if all you have are two opinions crashing into each other to get anywhere. But what some of the early philosophers figured out is if you shift the level of conversation one step underneath, and instead of arguing about your opinions head to head, argue about the reasons for your opinions, you get a lot farther. Why? Well, let's take the example again of recycling. If I say we should recycle and the other person says, no, that's ridiculous, the next step would be to say, well, what are the goals that we're aiming for? What are the different ideas that these actions are leading towards? So, say the person who believes in recycling says, well, I do it in order to save the environment because that's important to being able to live a happy life. The person who doesn't recycle might say, well, I don't think the environment is in any danger, but I agree that we need to live a happy life. That is a good point. I can agree with you on that. We share a fundamental agreement. And now, suddenly, the field opens up to have a conversation about what is the best way to accomplish, for instance, the goal of a happy life. And at this point, people can lay out their reasons for why they think recycling will lead to a happier life, why they think it won't. And you can make progress in a way you weren't able to before. This is a small demonstration of the way that the process of philosophical abstraction works. But in any case, so if we have some idea of politics as this art or activity of collectively living together, and philosophy as this way of posing questions about questions, or asking for the reasons behind whatever opinions someone might have, or the reasons behind how we think about things, what would political philosophy be, since that's our overall topic? Well, some political questions, especially if what politics is this act of collectively living together, we might ask, what would that even mean? And should we do it? I mean, what becomes of the individual? Aren't we, after all, individuals? Why are we living collectively together? Could we, go off and be hermits? Perhaps. Uh, what's lost if we do that? What's gained if we do that? Is it always true in every case that we're born into a society? And if so, how should we live together? How should society be organized? And with that idea of organization comes the idea of rule. How should power be organized? In other words, war, law, government, state. What are these things? Do they serve a purpose? Can they be better or worse? What's the purpose of politics itself? Is it towards the goal of stability or power or justice or freedom? And what if we disagree about these things? What means do we have to resolve these disagreements? And what can we achieve if we achieve that purpose? What are legitimate means towards that? So these are some of the sort of questions that political philosophy asks. Now, our course, here we arrive at last at our course, is entitled Rule and Revolt. And we are beginning with one very specific philosophical question, actually a question about political philosophy itself. And our question is political philosophy a justification of rule, which is to say a tool of the powerful, or a justification of revolt, a resource for the ruled and oppressed. So we'll see what becomes of this question. Is political philosophy on the side of rule or on the side of revolt? We'll see what becomes of this question. We might discover that the question needs to be transformed as we go along. We might discover that the question evolves. One of the really crucial turning points will be the idea of democracy, uh, which we're encountering in our second week, and then will be a constant theme. Democracy is particularly interesting since it's a type of rule that was the result of a revolt. As we'll see once we get there, Athenian democracy was a form of government not proposed by the government as like, well, this will be a great way for us to retain power, but it was sort of a crisis gesture in response to a series of revolts, and they were forced to include the people who were revolting, that is, the Athenian citizens were included at last in the government because of a series of revolts. Um, and we'll have to take a look at that, whether revolt and rule can actually be combined. In any event, this is going to be the subject of our course. As part of the introduction, I wanted to walk you through our syllabus, actually, and introduce you to our website, since a great deal of our course is going to be happening online. If you take a look at the syllabus, on the first page, you'll see a brief introduction. You can read that at your leisure. It sort of lays out the trajectory of the course, starting with the ancient political world and moving onwards into our global contemporary present. So take your time and look at that. It sort of lays out the logic connecting our different units together. If you turn the page, you will see some of the technical information and policies for our course. I will review them now just for your benefit. Our course fulfills the general education requirement category category G. There are no required texts that you buy. I put on request at the bookstore a collection of political texts that you can use for reference, but they're not required. All the required texts will appear as PDFs on Blackboard. As for technical requirements, you certainly need a computer and an internet connection. I guess that's already happened if you're watching this video. And I highly recommend you searching out Skype so that you can meet with me in online office hours and also potentially meet with each other in the group assignments that you'll be hearing about soon. As for our assignment policy, late assignments are subject to a 2% deduction per day. Extensions will be granted only in cases of exceptional personal circumstances or illnesses documented by a doctor's note. So email me, especially email me in advance if you think that something like that is going to happen. Student netiquette policy. Since a great deal of our course is online, this is something that's particularly important. When you're interacting with one another and with me, please be respectful and conducive to the learning of all. No racist, sexist, homophobic, or otherwise discriminatory comments will be tolerated. I hope this would be commonsensical, but I just very strongly want to underline that. Since our course is philosophical, a great deal of the content is stuff that I want you to challenge and think critically about. And so I definitely don't want you to agree with me all the time, perhaps none of the time, and certainly not with each other. But it's very important to me that you treat each other with a great deal of respect in the same way that you would want to be treated. I will be reviewing all of the comments and all the participation daily, and so let's just make sure that none of that, no insulting one another. You can bring a criticism of one another, but very respectfully and with an appreciation for one another. Hopefully that won't be a problem. Pacing. This is an important one. Since this is a 3-credit course and it replicates an in-person undergraduate course, which typically involves 37 hours over a 15-week period, remember, we're taking a whole semester and squishing it into 6 weeks, which means that this course is going to be very intense, and I'm assigning roughly twice the amount per week that I would in a normal 3-month-long course. Um, in order to do well in this class, you really need to follow the schedule very carefully. If there's a reading assigned for a certain day, you very much need to have it read by that day. Otherwise, you're going to really quickly fall very far behind because of the speed of the class, since it's compressed like this. Um, so I'd just like to very strongly underline that idea of pacing. Plagiarism. Everything that happens on the online course passes through passively anti-plagiarism software. Um, there's a definition of plagiarism at the end of the syllabus. I'd just like to say, do not do it. It's not worth it. If you are in a situation where you are running late or you are struggling with an assignment you don't feel ready to complete, email me and we can at least try to find a solution where you can at least pass that assignment. Whereas if you plagiarize, not only do you fail that assignment, you fail the course, and you are reported to the academic judiciary, and it's a really unpleasant situation. So let's avoid that. As for online office hours, they will be coordinated based on request, but I'm very open to meeting with you on Skype and talking through any issues you have, whether it's for an assignment or for the course. You can email me at adam.israel@stonybrook.edu, and my Skype address is at the top. It's Adam Israel Stonybrook. And so reach out to me with any sort of questions or inquiries. I'd be excited to schedule office hours. Now we get to the more interesting stuff, our assignments. The first assignment is the discussion board assignment. Hold on. Hey guys, I just figured out how to record without the reflection coming into my glasses, so in future videos you will not have to suffer this. Let me return to the syllabus for a second. We were just, let's see, we're just talking about the discussion board. So yeah, so the discussion board, since our classes happen online, a great deal of the class actually happens on the discussion board. There are 12 structured discussions that we're going to have during the weeks, and they're going to happen in a sort of interesting way. For each discussion, you have to make at least 3 different posts, and they're different types of posts. The first one is going to be a response to questions that I post up to start the discussion off. The second type of post is going to actually change how you do it depending on the week. One group, and there are going to be 6 groups of you during the course. One group has the responsibility to pose a question to the class. So that means starting a new thread in the forum. And you'll see how that works as you go. So one group, each member of that group has the responsibility to pose a question for that discussion. And then if you're not in that group, you have a responsibility to attempt a response to one of the student-posed questions. So that's the second comment you need to make, minimum. And the third is a response to someone else's response. So a comment on someone else's response, either to one of my questions or to one of the student-posed questions. And those are the 3 minimum posts you need to make on every discussion board. So just to review, one in response to my questions, your own question if it's your turn, or a response if it's not, and then a comment on someone else's comment. So that's 3 minimum for every class discussion. It's 30% of your grade. It's a third of the course. This is sort of what replaces a normal classroom discussion in combination with my lecture. So it's very important. If you go above and beyond, I will certainly notice. But you have to do the minimum. But I encourage you to respond as much as you want, and feel free to include links to YouTube videos or articles or any other kind of media that is sparked off in your mind in response to the text that we're reading or the issues we're discussing. And feel free to engage each other as extensively as you want. I really encourage that, and it will certainly be reflected in your final grade in this portion of the course. But everyone has to make sure to do the minimum, which is at least 3 posts for every discussion, or else very rapidly you start heading into losing a lot of points in that category. And at the end of the week, I'll post a response video to your whole conversation. So you get 2 videos of me per week. One introductory lecture, which this is the first example, and then a response video where I'll have, after having looked over the whole discussion, and I'll jump in now and then, but at the end of the week, I'll respond to the discussion in a response video. So that's what you can expect for that. Then you can skip ahead quickly to look at this idea of tests. There'll be 2 of them. They're going to be timed and online. And really the purpose of them is just to help you gather up the material and have a sense of what it is that I'm expecting you to have mastered at each of the steps. They're worth 10% each, so 20% together. And then the last piece, the most interesting assignment, at least from my perspective, are the instances. There's one mini instance, which is worth 10%, and then 2 full-size instances, which together are 30% of your grade. Now, the way the instances work, they're half individual, half group projects. So the individual half of the assignment is when, for each of the instances, which are sort of current events issues, and there are 3 of them, they're already structured out. The first one has to do with whistleblowers and WikiLeaks. The second one has to do with the refugee crisis in Europe. And the third one has to do with the United States and Latin America relationship. Those are the 3. And for each of them, the 5 members of your group, each one will take a different perspective of someone from within that group and write an analysis of the issue from that perspective using some of the philosophical tools that we've accumulated by then. And after writing that analysis, the next step is you join up again with all of your group members, and you have to have a sort of conversation from those perspectives. The sort of basic minimum requirement is to have a Google Doc that you work on together, and each of you sort of put in your perspectives in a conversation with each other. That only counts for the full instances. The mini one, you don't have to do this part, the group part. But in the full instances, you do. And so, yeah, the minimum is create a Google Doc together, bringing these perspectives into communication with each other. So it's sort of like a discussion, but in character, if you will. In the past, students have gotten really creative with this assignment and made videos as a group, or made a sort of a blog as a group, or included images, and I heartily encourage you to do that. You can be as creative as you want, but the basic minimum is to have a collective Google Doc that you edit together as your group work part of that assignment, dealing with the issue from your different perspectives. And so that's an assignment where you're going to bring together current events, analysis, the ability to take different perspectives, and the ability to use political philosophy, because I want you to understand and appreciate for yourselves how this could actually be a helpful way to understand the world. Last but not least, you have the class schedule. So this gives you a sense of what our 6-week semester is going to look like. The different units are lined up at the top. You'll notice that there are instructions for every day of what to do. Discussions on the reading begin on the reading day and continue through till the next reading. So you have 3 days to participate in the discussion board for each of the discussions. The group who's assigned to pose questions that week, which you'll find on the discussions themselves, it says who is supposed to present that week, have to have their questions up by noon on the day that says discussion. So for instance, for discussion 1, if you're in the question posing group, you need your questions up by this Wednesday. So that's group A. I'm talking to you. And so on and so forth. Let's see. You'll see on the bottom the instances are listed and the due dates next to them. The 2 tests are listed. Up in the top in red is the drop day, which is June 6th. That's when you can drop with no record on your transcript. And the 1st of July is the last day you can drop with a withdraw. That's the last day you can drop with a W or credit, no credit option. And otherwise, you'll see some of the key questions for each of the discussions. There are going to be more on the actual discussions, but I put some questions here just to give you a sense of what those discussions are going to be like. Yeah, and on the website, take a look around. You'll notice in the discussion board there's a forum for general questions. So if you have any questions about what I've said so far or about the course, that's where to post them, and I'll respond on a daily basis. There's also what I've put out there as introductions. So I'd like each of you to take a look at that question and post up an introduction of yourself, both for my sake and for each other's sake. Right next to where it says start, you'll notice not only the syllabus, but also the groups. So there's two different groupings. One is for the first half of the course, you're in groups A, B, C, D, E. And then in the second half of the course, it's a new groups A, B, C, D, E. So you get a chance to work with different folks. Take a look at that. You'll see most of the course material is under the menu that says course units. If you click there, you'll see weeks 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So far, weeks 1 and 2, their content is up. The content of the ensuing weeks will sort of appear as we get closer to those weeks, so you're not overwhelmed with all of that stuff. So you can take a look at weeks 1 and 2 to get a sense of what the expectations will be for those weeks. The assignments button is where I'll be posting up the links and the further instructions as we get close to the instance assignment, and that's also where the tests will be. Web links and resources. I've put some resources up there on political philosophy as well as for contemporary news and events. So you could take a look there to get a sense of what that looks like. And let's see, any other information that I can give you? Well, if there's any other questions you have, feel free to post them up in general questions or email me at adam.israel@stonybrook.edu. Next up will be an introductory lecture on our readings for this week, which is the Code of Hammurabi, the Tale of the Eloquent Peasant from Ancient Egypt, and several articles both about the Black Lives Matter movement and the presidential race in the United States right now. So I'll have that introductory lecture up momentarily, and it will appear in the, unsurprisingly, lectures menu. In any case, welcome to the course. My name is Adam, as I mentioned. I can't wait to get to meet you, read your introductions, and also hopefully see you in my Skype office hours. Have a great Memorial Day. And by the way, Memorial Day is an interesting political question. You can think about that later, but the creation of holidays is a very political process, particularly holidays that have to do with the history of warfare. So, since today is Memorial Day, take a second to think about the question of political holidays and their signification. There's a bonus thing for you to think about today. In any case, have a good Memorial Day, and I will talk to you soon.